Today we have a very special talk for Cant Schoolland, the predilect of Liberty International. So we're going to talk about market alternatives to government, control of migration and labor in time of crisis. Cant Schoolland is an associate professor of economics and director of the Entrepreneurship Center at Hawaii Pacific University. He's on the board of Scholars of Grassroots Institute of Hawaii and member of the Monterey Society, and formerly president of Liberty International. Cant Schoolland is the author of The Adventures of Jonathan Gulliver, a free market odyssey, as you can see from our banner outside, and has published in more than 80 different versions and more than 50 different languages, and performed in theatrical productions across Africa, Europe, and Asia. So just a quick last comment. I remember in Mongolia on the tour day on Monday in 2019, I was sitting next to Ken and we were talking about this conference here, and we were actually discussing what will be the ideal topic for the conference this year. And we came up with market alternatives to government, so I'm happy to introduce to you to Cant Schoolland, so please give it up.
Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be here. And Colombia, especially Medellin, is just a paradise. It's been such a beautiful place and wonderful people. And I can't think of a better topic for a libertarian conference than migration, because it's where you can make the difference. I mean, a lot of times our activities are to try and change the liberty situation in a whole country. But it's just as important many times to just change it for yourself, to move to a freer society. So this is my talk about things today. First of all, to mention that for years, my wife and I have both been part of Liberty International. She organized our conferences in Shanghai, Bratislava, and Morocco, and Bali, and has organized for 10 years seminars that have been touring China, talking about free market, Austrian economics, and libertarian values. And also in Mongolia, where we had done those for 5 years. Okay, my wife's family grew up in China during the Cultural Revolution, during the worst of times. Actually, she was born just before the Great Leap Forward, where Mao contrived to kill millions of Chinese. Her father was a surgeon, and her mother a professor of English at the Nankai University. For making a comment about Mao's wife, he was sent to prison for a year at hard labor, and then the whole family was exiled to the southern provinces for 10 years, when all the schools were closed. And the Cultural Revolution ravaged the whole of society. Estimates by some have placed as many as 75 million lives lost under Mao's control. 7 of Lee's family members committed suicide because of the completely upside-down society that existed at the time. Fortunately, they've all been able to come to America. My father-in-law did heart transplant surgery, heart transplant research at Mayo Clinic, and then at the University of Texas. Her mother founded the Chinese language program at Kansas University and at Brandeis University. Her brother is a civil engineer in Lawrence, and she is my wife. I think it's such a good idea. I suggested maybe I could marry more Chinese wives, and she said that wasn't a very good idea. Sort of an old custom to allow more than one wife. And a couple of our very good friends in Hawaii are Wen and David. And these two, I have to say, I greatly admire the courage and guts and willpower of migrants. I mean, these two gathered together as much as $10,000 each from family and friends in Fujian province, a fishing village in China, to flee to Ecuador with the help of black market travel agents. They came to Ecuador and started work in construction, not knowing a word of Spanish, and then they moved throughout the months, over a year, going all the way up to the coastline to across the border in the United States illegally. They came to Hawaii. My daughter and I met them teaching them English at a church, and we got to know them quite well. They finally applied for asylum, and because they had more than one child in China, that was qualification for asylum in the United States. Also, it was after the Tiananmen massacre, when the US government was a bit more open, and also because they were Christians, they decided to give them asylum. And so they came, and their families came. They now not only were the hardiest and strongest, hardworking people that I know of, but they have founded, both of them have founded their own construction companies. They have dozens of workers working for them on dozens of houses in Hawaii. So they're a great example of the great virtues of the hard. You know, it takes a lot of courage to be a migrant. I can't imagine people saying, oh, they just come for the welfare. I mean, people who are just lazy and not interested in work are not the ones who leave behind everything that's familiar and go to some place that's completely unfamiliar to them and take the risks in a hostile place. And by the way, now they've been so successful in the United States, they've paid off many times over all of the family and friends that sponsored their trip to the United States in the first place. My own family is from migrants too. My great-grandfather came from the Netherlands, and well, actually all of the Dutch from the Netherlands one time or another in the 19th century came, and I'm grateful for that as well. It is the history of human beings throughout the world to move from one place to another, often for opportunities, often for a better life for oneself and one's family, to avoid famine, to avoid tyranny and persecution. That's the history of human beings. So much that, so that it should be recognized as what Ilya Somin calls foot voting. How to be able to transform your life from one place to another simply by moving away from a system that's bad or threatening into a better place. Now, Christians are well aware of this. There are a lot of Christians in Colombia and around the world. They know from their biblical text of how, well, sometimes it was necessary to flee persecution, as Jesus and Mary and Joseph did when they fled Herod and went to Egypt. Thank goodness that Egypt didn't have a quota and say, I'm sorry, there's no place here for you. And in the Old Testament, how Abraham and Sarah and Jacob and Joseph and all of his brothers fled to Egypt because of the famine. Well, thank goodness they didn't have a quota and say, I'm sorry, you're not allowed in here. As we often do today, things that have never been really considered in ancient times, but it's the whole history of people in every part of the world, in Latin America, in Hawaii, where I'm from, and elsewhere. Sadly, this coronavirus that has hit is not just a disease against people's health, but it's against the economy, which is also not really recognized as part of our health, our livelihood. I don't make a distinction between political refugees and economic refugees. Whenever somebody leaves an economic system, they're a refugee from a political system that they're trying to find refuge from and find a better place. When Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister of India, locked down India, I'd say that he put enormous numbers of people at great risk. Millions of people suddenly lost their jobs in New Delhi, had to march hundreds of miles back to their villages by foot in crowds because the public transport was all closed. And it is estimated by the World Bank and others that by the end of the year, 500 million people may be pushed into destitution, largely because of the pandemic, and you would have to say the reaction to it. One thing very close to home here, of course, is what has happened in Venezuela. The people of Venezuela, 20 years ago, had open arms towards the people from Colombia, who went by the millions, I'm told, because of the hard times, the war, and the troubles here in Colombia. They found refuge in wealthy and prosperous Venezuela. But as things became much better in Colombia and much worse in Venezuela, the tide turned. And the Colombians came back, and so did millions of Venezuelans. And I have to say that I am extremely, extremely warmed to see the welcoming that they have been able to receive in this country compared to the country that I have to call home. The United States has been so much unwelcoming by comparison. There's only one other country that I know of where there's been a greater embrace of refugees, and that was in Lebanon. My friend Patrick Bardini, head of the Lebanese Institute for Market Studies, says that there's 4 million population in Lebanon. They've accepted 2 million refugees from Syria and another million Palestinians. So that's an enormous number. But to tell the story of how difficult it is for the people from Venezuela, I've invited 5 law students or a lawyer and 4 law students who have come here from Venezuela for this event to tell their story. So why don't you come on up and please say what you've experienced.
Okay, thank you all, thank you Ken. I will try, I have the job to tell you in 2 minutes what is going on in Venezuela, so I have some notes over here, and I will try my best, because it's a hard situation. So, let's start with the economic crisis. Everyone talked about how the economic crisis just burned the Venezuelan economy, and that's why we have about 3,000% hyperinflation in our country. Just imagine what that does to the prices of the goods and the services. That is like the Promedian Venezuelan folks just win like $1 or $2 for a month to survive. Just that, nothing else. The rest of the money they get, they do that for other ways. Everyone have at least 2 jobs or 2 entrants of money, because the crisis just lead us to that. Okay, so we have to close the borders. We don't have the borders open since 2013 or 14, depends of the border. So we can't actually get out of Venezuela. How we did it, my partners will tell to you, but it is a complicated situation. Let's get in, and then let's get then into the social and health crisis generated the refugee crisis in Latin America and the world continent. What is that? There is, okay, no problem. We have like between 5 million and 6 million Venezuelans, countrymen, out of the country. Much of them are refugees for the court of Cartagena. They are refugees by that court, and we live, or if we talk about that, the most kind of people who left Venezuela are young people, or people in job ages. Let's talk about that a little bit. If we don't have young people, or universities are closed actually, or universities don't have students, we have, or we are at least, just, I don't know, I can say like 30% less students in this moment than we are like 10 years ago. Let's keep moving. In the political crisis, I don't know if you all know that we have 2 governments, 2 parallel governments. The government of Nicolás Maduro, who have the power inside Venezuela, and the government of Juan Guaidó, who is, I don't know how to explain this very easily, but he has like the political support from the international community in some countries. Colombia is one of those. After that, we have a huge and enormous corruption inside the state of Venezuela. So we have to combat that, or just survive with that way any way we can. Let's keep moving for the time. And we have criminal organizations. I'm sorry I can't just tell you all the story, but it's too much, so I will try my best. We have terrorist organization, Hezbollah is inside Venezuela. We have the guerrilla in Venezuela, now it's a national guerrilla. And we have the drug trafficking cartels. Which ones? Okay, the Wall Street of Venezuela, it's a cartel. The United States, the DEA, told that the state of Venezuela was a narco state. Why? Because there is a cartel called Cartel of the Souls, of the Sons, so Cartel de los Soles in Spanish, and they have the world power inside Venezuela, and they control the world trafficking, drug trafficking inside Venezuela. They do business with the guerrilla, with another cartels in Mexico, with another cartels in the world, and just imagine how much money get out of Venezuela and inside. That's why we have sanctions against Venezuela, and we have to keep them. Finally, we have parallel groups and paramilitary groups, which just created to fight against the guerrilla, against the criminal organizations inside Venezuela, and even against the security corps of Venezuela. That is at least a summary, a huge summary of all the problem. I hope it will be help for these little minutes, but that's things. Thank you for.
Good afternoon, everyone. From Venezuela, I'm a law student, just as my friends, and I'm part of Students for Liberty there in Venezuela. I really want to make a point about the situation that we want to share some of our experiences. And the first point is that no one really wants to leave the home that they have. The immigration situation in Venezuela just starts by the first years of this century. As soon as Hugo Chavez took office and took power in Venezuela, the situation just escalated. Political, social, and economic crisis just started to impact in every family inside Venezuela. So that's why, for example, in the first years of Chavismo, in the first years of the revolution, probably a lot of wealthy people or educated people started to leave the country because they were seeing in the future that the opportunities were going to be lower. But as soon as the years were passing, we experienced another type of migration. And it's because in the situation, we're not only talking about one type of migrant, we're talking about a lot of types of migrants in Venezuela. So that's, for example, unskilled labor, it's probably the biggest number, but it's not the only type of migrant that we could find. Because there's also educated people, and in Venezuela, because it's kind of easy, and also in a cultural aspect, it's like a necessity to go to university, go to college. A lot of Venezuelan migrants actually have university degrees and college degrees. So a lot of the people that are fleeing the country have the opportunity to get a job more quick and more easy than most of the migrants in general. But also, I want to say that in the current situation and in the point of history that we probably looking for images like that. And when you find an image like that of a lot of people, thousands, hundreds of people, you could find that some of them are probably go to the frontier by plane, by car, but probably most of those persons are just finishing a trip of more than 700 miles by foot, even using for example, Coca-Cola cans to protect their foods. And that's why specifically the situation in Venezuela has a lot of differences and a lot of important things to understand about who are these people and who are they doing. And especially, I took back my first point, and it was that no one really wants to leave his home. And this is probably the most important insight of every picture that we're seeing right now. Thank you.
Sorry, it's very emotional for me to talk about this. Do you see those pictures? We had to cross the border like that to come to this conference. It was a very traumatic and bad experience for us because we had to treat with the guerrillas and we had to pay bribes to government of Venezuela because they don't want us to cross the border to leave the country, so they don't let us keep our passports or keep our DNAs, and that's very bad for us. And well, I am from Caracas and I had to take a flight to the border with Colombia because my state or my city is 700 kilometers from the border with Colombia, and it was very hard and it was very expensive too because prices in Venezuela is not like most of you would think that they are. Minimum wage in Venezuela is $1, but the price of my flight was of $50. So it's very expensive, and when you have to buy a thing like a cup of tea in some other country and it costs like $1, in Venezuela it costs like $5. And it's very expensive, so our experience was very bad because we have to drink with the guerrilla. We were very scared. I had the lucky to cross with Caesar because he received me in his house, but other of my partner have to cross alone. Andrea have to cross along the border, another dangerous border. She has to pay a bribe of $200 because they don't want her to come to this. And please be careful with the videos and all of that in social media because this is not legal. And government don't let us do the things right. I mean, we are not crossing the border because we want to stay illegally in another country. We want to attend a conference that is like the opportunity of your life. I mean, we are here, we are meeting you all, and you all are amazing and well. And thank you for the opportunity because it's super cool and it's very emotional to talk about the situation of Venezuela and our experience crossing the border. And well, government don't let us do the things right. That's why we have to do illegal things like crossing the border like that, with all those risks and damages.
With all my friends, we are here because we want to attend this conference and we are very, very happy. And my friends are crying, don't cry. Anyway, after listening to my friends, I would like to share with us what we feel about this situation. Every Venezuelan is living a harsh reality. We live under the authoritarian regime of Nicolas Maduro, a drug trafficker, a criminal, corrupt, who has continued the system known as socialism that Hugo Chavez established in our country. We live in a country that is going through an economical, political, and social crisis that has reached every corner to this earth. So to talk about the problems to Venezuela would be an infinite list, but I think we will really need another conference to talk about the problems of Venezuela. But we have this conference, and I am so glad that we have a voice in this conference because that's an incredible opportunity that, as Maria said, is an opportunity that we have in our first opportunity. Venezuelans are going through the worst of our story. But even though the situation is extremely terrible, there are many people working for freedom, like us. We are here because we believe in the freedom, we believe in the change we can make in our country, and I think this is an opportunity to explain the freedom in a simple way to others who don't understand the freedom as with the first hand. In this sense, we accept the scholarship to attend this conference because we believe in the cause of freedom, and we consider it an incredible opportunity for us in order to expand our knowledge in the ideas and many tools to spread the ideas the best way in our country. Thank you.
First, I just wanted to say sorry because I know this is not the place for crying or anything, but it's just that the thing with Andrea, Maria, Cesar, and Edward is that they still live in Venezuela. After this conference, they will go back. but I don't. I officially immigrated to Colombia 1 year ago, so this always just give me, so this just made me remind a lot of things, and I'm really sorry, but I just wanted to say that it's very difficult to migrate, and it's not just to keep your, it is not about just taking your things and leaving your house. It's not as easy as it seems, and I mean, wait. So, if you know me, you know that I love the state where I was born, which is Zulia, Maracaibo. I love it. I think it's the best place on earth. Even though when I don't have electricity all the time, or I don't have water all the time, I think it's the place I love the most, and I think it's the place that makes me happy. The thing is that if you asked me 2 years ago, I would say, me, migrate, I won't do that thing. Because I love my state, I want to be a lawyer, I want to, and I know I was angry when people told me, why don't you leave Venezuela? And I was so angry with those people that in that moment asked me that question. Years later, in 2019, my mother was kidnapped when I was in a program in the United States. And after that, we obviously have to move to Venezuela. And that was something that I never expected. I leave my country to the United States just for an academic program, and I was waiting to come back to be in my house with my family, to spend Christmas with them, and I wasn't able to do so in that moment. Then, okay, I was here in Colombia, in Bogota specifically, and I think everyone has been so nice to me, and I know this is not the case to all Venezuelans here in Colombia, because I think there are so many feelings of angry and things that happened in the past that I think nobody has the fault in this moment right now. But I'm happy that I have a good experience, that no one treats me bad, that I have friends, that I'm able to continue with my wish of being a lawyer. I'm doing the things for exercising here, and I feel I have a future here, that I have an opportunity, that I have electricity, that I have water, that I can go to a judicial system, and that they will respond if something happens to me, and that makes me feel certain about something, and not that I'm walking into the sky or something that I can fall in any moment. So I'm very grateful to Colombian people, to Colombia in general for that, for giving me that opportunity of feeling like this, because it's very new for me, like walking and not being afraid of your phone or your things or whatever. I think it's not, living in Venezuela is not only, okay, I have money, I can pay a light generator, electricity generator, I can pay water, I can pay whatever, I can pay my house, and then I will live okay. No, because you are risking your mental peace of living okay. More than just having money. So I'm very grateful to Colombia for that. And I just wanted to say that it's not easy. Not all migrants look the same. If you see me in the street, you wouldn't think that I passed through something like this, but the thing is that I did, and that we always should be respectful with everyone, and accept that you might not know things about someone, and that doesn't give you the right to do something to them, or to speak something about someone that you don't know. And I think the most difficult thing to accept is that I know my city that I love with my heart, or my country, will shine again in the future, but I won't see it. But I'm willing to work for seeing that future, even if it is from here. Thank you.
It is so easy to reject outsiders that we don't know and we haven't seen before. It's often in people's minds throughout the world. Oh, by the way, I have to thank Kyle Varner for sponsoring all of the students from Venezuela who came here. Thank you very much. Bastiat said, the unseen is, I mean, the seen is what we fear in the news and the headlines. The unseen is what people can become. I mean, how many migrants who are fleeing persecution have become part of the libertarian legacy, you know, Ayn Rand and Friedrich Bastiat and Ludwig von Mises, even Hans Hermann Hoppe, Albert Einstein and others. A lot of times people think that well, I'm going to skip this, wrong direction here. A lot of times people think, well, there's no space, there's going to be crowds. Well, that's not true, really. Throughout the world and throughout history, we found that people move to the cities because that's where the action is, the economies of scale, comparative advantage, specialization, division of labor, and all the music and good restaurants. People move to cities because that's where very great prosperity is. They move away from the countryside and so on. Oh, by the way, here's Jose. He's from Cuba, another guy who came here from Cuba. It reminds me when I was teaching a class in international trade and finance, a section on migration, and a custodian came in to empty the trash, and I halted the class and I said, where are you from, by the way? And he said, I'm from the Philippines, sir. And what did you do in the Philippines before you came here? He says, I was a political science professor. And you know, I felt my heart went out to him, you know, what it is that drives people away from things that are pretty harsh to things that look like a better opportunity, if only they could exercise the opportunities in the new land. And a lot of countries are, as we discussed earlier in the session yesterday, a lot of the prosperous countries have declining fertility rates. They need more people to sustain older populations. So on a practical basis, it's very good to have more people. The Economist Magazine recently did an analysis saying that if all of the so-called illegal immigrants in the United States were simply legalized, allowed to remain, that could lead to $1.5 trillion of increased economic activity over the next 10 years. A lot of extra income and prosperity for the whole country simply by certifying them as being allowed to stay. The Time magazine had a cover just recently of all the help wanted signs saying we've got 9.2 million job openings and nobody wants them because they're being paid by the government to stay home, or they have better prospects by not working. But there are millions of immigrants who would like to fill those jobs. They are very hardworking and willing people. Adrian Herrmann points out that immigrants are twice as likely to start new businesses as entrepreneurs. Stuart Anderson, immigrant entrepreneurs are the heroes of a market-based economy, driving innovation and job creation. And look at all of the companies that they've started over the years as immigrants to the United States. The research has pretty much shown that immigrants are self-selective. They're very, very diligent, hardworking people with good work ethics, strong family values, and one generation after coming, they're earning more than the average American, which of course makes some Americans somewhat resentful. And of course, sadly, the United States has a history of presidents. President Barack Obama, for all of his public image, was known also as the deporter-in-chief, because he sent out of the country more immigrants into the United States than any previous president. It was topped again by President Trump, who had no fondness for immigrants. And of course, Joe Biden, even though he's got a positive public image towards immigrants, hasn't really changed the policy whatsoever. He is ultimately a protectionist, as are most Democrats and Republicans. They have instituted policies that have driven a lot of people into a much worse hardship than they would have to be in other countries. And these have come in a variety of protectionist welfare programs in the United States to protect American industries and American jobs from outside competition that drives poverty, crime, and corruption abroad. I'll talk about some of these. For example, the United States government says there's a quota on how many pounds of sugar Americans are allowed to buy. So they have to pay 20 cents a pound for sugar in the United States when they could pay 5 cents a pound for sugar outside. From all the countries of Latin America, Central America, the Caribbean, the Philippines, all countries around the world could be providing lower prices for American consumers and becoming rich themselves if they were allowed to sell their products to the United States, Europe, and Japan, which they're not. Then the Economist Magazine says if rich countries were to remove the subsidies to agriculture, poor countries would benefit by more than 3 times the amount of all overseas development assistance they receive every year. So President Biden says, well, we're going to hand out some money to regimes in other countries, which goes essentially from poor people in rich countries to go to rich people in poor countries, and it insulates the powerful in those countries. They can be corrupt, they can be removed from the necessity of serving their own populations because they get a lot of largesse from the United States. And it enables very wealthy sugar plantations to become extremely wealthy at the expense of people in other countries who could produce wealth and are not allowed to. Also, the drug war that the United States perpetuates is something that is criminal on the world. We know what alcohol prohibition did in the United States. It generated an enormous black market and enormously funded organized crime. So they ended alcohol prohibition, but they kept up with the other kinds of drug prohibition, which means massive amounts of money to narco regimes all around the world, especially in Venezuela and in Cuba. Narcotics, says Ian Grillo, narcotics are the biggest black market earner of all, estimated to be worth more than $300 billion a year. The global industry has pumped huge resources into criminal empires decade after decade. So I would say, first of all, if you're going to try and help people in other countries, don't give money to the government and leaders, end the trade barriers. If you're going to try and help the farmers in other countries, don't unload massive amounts of food from American farmers that undermines and ruins the farmers abroad. If you're trying to help people in other countries, don't enrich the powerful black market drug warlords with drug crime. Now, Joe Biden considers himself the new Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He said he considers him the great model of the past. He wants to do great and grand things like Franklin Delano Roosevelt did. Well, actually, the greatest shame of Franklin Delano Roosevelt is that in the 1930s and 40s, when millions of people were trying to flee tyranny in Europe under Stalin, Hitler, Mussolini, and others, he put up quotas. Just like politicians are putting up quotas telling us how many products, how many pounds of sugar we're allowed to buy, they put up quotas saying how many people we're allowed to hire. And those quotas essentially shut the door on millions of people who could have fled that tyranny. As many of you may know Anne Frank, the story of Anne Frank from her diary. Her family twice applied to the United States for visas, but were twice denied, which meant that they wound up being killed in the concentration camps, along with millions of other people who could have fled had they simply allowed them to come to a place of refuge. As some Americans later immigrated and were able to be enormously beneficial, how many millions of others were slaughtered instead of allowing them to blossom? So this idea of quotas raises the question of the law. All the time I'm hearing people say, well, you can't allow these illegals, they broke the law. Well, frankly, everybody breaks the law. I'm guessing that everybody in this room, everybody in the country breaks the speed limit every day. Breaking the speed limit, going over the speed limit is a misdemeanor, as it is coming across the border without permission. Everybody does that because we're trying to save time. Well, how much more willing would we be to break to go over the speed limit if it was going to save 10 years of our life, or the lives of our family and our friends and children. The rule of law was popularized by Albert Vin Dicey, who was a British jurist, who characterized the law as saying it had to have these three elements. One, it had to be applied consistently as a written principle to all the people, so that it isn't whimsical. It isn't one way for one person and a different way for another. It had to apply equally to all. In other words, no person was superior to the law. The king was not above the law. But the third and most important element that people most often forget is that the law had to uphold individual rights. If it didn't, then it was bad law. It was criminal against the rights of individuals. And so we often see people needing to break the law, and we condone it because it was a great and virtuous thing. When the American founding fathers all broke the laws of England to break away from England, they were all lawbreakers. They would have all hung if King George III had gotten his hands on them. And one of their reasons for signing the Declaration of Independence, one of the items was that King George III was preventing people from coming into the colonies. Of course, there were other lawbreakers that we champion today, Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman and William Lloyd Garrison, who essentially were against the laws of the day that said a slave that ran away from a plantation was property that stole itself and had to be returned by the authorities to the rightful owner. Well, everybody now realizes that's a ridiculous law, as I would expect that one day we will consider these immigration laws as abolitionist abominations. But it prevents people from finding freedom and prosperity. There were a lot of other great heroes, I think, of the Holocaust. Most people know of Oskar Schindler, who helped Jews escape the Germans, but few people know of Chiune Sugihara and Dr. He von Schum, who, as the Consul General for Japan in Vilnius, Lithuania, and the Consul General for the Chinese in Vienna, they signed the visas for thousands of Jews who would be able to escape, even though they were violating the orders of their own governments. And today they're barely known. One hero in our midst right now is Henry Song, who does more than anyone else I know to help North Korean refugees to escape to freedom and to spread the news about the outside world in order to encourage them to leave. He's a guy that I really, really admire. And I wish that I had the courage that all of these people do. I don't know, I haven't been tested that way. But I should hope that one day, if I'm ever faced with having to have to flee tyranny to go to a place of freedom, at great risk to my own life, that I'd be willing to do so when it's easier to just sit back and do nothing. So I say there are market alternatives to government. The non-aggression principle of libertarians is that if I don't have the right to use force against this guy to prevent him from hiring somebody else, then I don't have the right to ask the government to do it for me. The non-aggression principle is pretty clear on that. And so I would say, well, if you're an excluder and you don't want to associate with outsiders, then you have the right not to pay for anyone to associate with them, and you can exclude them with your own money and your own property. But they have no right to infringe on the rights of inviters, those who do wish to associate with others, to hire others, to invite them to work in their factories, to start businesses, to live in their houses, to go to their grocery stores. They have a right to contract with whomever they choose with their own money and their own property. So to that end, I would say end the trade barriers, end the welfare to tyrants around the world, end corporate protectionism, which prevents people from other countries from selling products to your homeland, end people quotas of all kinds, end labor and commerce restrictions that get in their way of getting jobs and working, and ending the drug wars. So ultimately I say, it is practical. The libertarian principle of non-aggression is practical. It brings great prosperity to the world. It is humanitarian. It brings the greatest benefits to people who are the most destitute. And above all, it is ethical. It is voluntary behavior in a society that does not condone violence. And to me, ultimately I say, treat others as we would want them to treat us if we were in their shoes.
Thank you, Ken, for this inspirational speech, and thank you for all your stories. So now we're taking some questions.
Hi, thank you for the lecture. My name is Mikhail Svetov. I'm from Russia. You concentrated on benefits of immigration. I'd like to hear from you more about freedom of association, because you mentioned the right to exclude immigrants and private property. But we live in a society that criminalizes private discrimination. People are not free to choose who they work with. People are not free to choose who they live with. People are not free to choose who they rent their apartment with, because if they start to choose, they'll be put in jail. So we're not living in a society that respects freedom of association, and that what brings about the tension against immigrants, etc., etc. So what is your answer and your outlook on this situation in the unfree society?
Yeah, it's the same kind of question that I often get from, even Milton Friedman at our Puerto Vallarta conference said, well, you can't allow immigration as long as you have the welfare state. Now, it's true, the welfare state is an aggression against you, and it's wrong, and I advocate ending the welfare state for immigrants and for Americans, for anybody. You know, it's wrong to steal money from one person to another. There's a lot more opportunity for people to do well in a free and prosperous society with voluntary charity and so on than there is with force. So yes, I think that it's wrong for the government to do those things, to forcibly require you to associate. But I don't say that you should say, well, we're going to wait with all freedom until the government eliminates this particular kind of aggression. That would be like saying, we can't allow you to have children because we're going to force this person to pay for your welfare. We're going to force this person to pay for the schooling. We're going to force this person to pay for your housing. So I'm sorry, you can't have children until we control everything that you're going to do with them. So I would say, yes, those are wrong things for the government to do. It doesn't give a justification to do more wrong things against other people. And you can tell that to Herrmann Hoppe, the immigrant from Germany who came to the United States living off the government school, and I think he's very hypocritical for the positions he's taken against immigrants. At our Berlin conference, by the way. Yes.
Ken, thank you so much for this great talk, and to all of our young friends from Venezuela, we so admire your courage and strength to talk about this difficult situation to us. You are an inspiration to us. I'd like to ask you, what effect has the socialist economic and freedom crisis in Venezuela had on the neighboring countries? Has it primarily emboldened socialists in those countries, or has it had the opposite effect? Or perhaps both. Maybe it's strengthened the resolve of both pro and con. I grew up in southern Florida in the 1960s when so many Cuban refugees were coming to southern Florida, and their antipathy towards Castro and socialism was so strong. To this day, Florida is one of the most, perhaps the most freedom-loving state in the U.S., thanks to many of those folks and their descendants. So what effect has it had here? Thank you.
Well, thank you. We are pro-liberty activists. We are pro-liberty activists. We love freedom, even when we don't know freedom firsthand in Venezuela. So the situation of Venezuela is very complicated because we are facing an authoritarian regime that is not socialism, is not communism, is like collectivism in the worst way you can see it, because they use sometimes advocate of liberal reforms, like talking or implementing policies of special economic zones or charter cities or things like that. And international communities see Nicolas Maduro like, well, he's doing things great, and Juan Guaido is not doing anything. So we are going to support Maduro, or we are going to support Juan Guaido, and then nothing happens, and Venezuelans are in the middle of that conflict. So we are here because we want a a change in our country, and we know that with like protesting in the streets, we are not going to achieve anything because a lot of hundreds of Venezuelan young people died in the streets with riots and protests because Nicolas Maduro's regime is very repressive and he arbitrarily detain people in the streets. So we are preparing ourselves, and as I said Kyle yesterday in the workshop, we are like putting into ourselves capital and resources to give the fight we have to do. And that's why we are here. And that's why we are going to cross that border again on Monday. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you. I think I can add something of what Maria said, and it is that a little history about what happened to Venezuela. It started all in the past century, actually in 1958, when the last right regime fell, and we started to have left-wing governments. All the left-wing government since 1968 to the 2000s were all left-wing. Well, that created a feeling inside that the young people who born since those 50 years, like they don't have the possibility to really progress into Venezuela. We had petroleum, we always had it. We had gold, we had tourism, we had a great economy, but the people think it was bad distributed. And the most important thing over here is the last 5 years of the 90s. Why it was so important? We had crisis, economical crisis, which we have never seen. They have never seen. I haven't born yet. And those crises turned the young people to think that the welfare system doesn't help them, and they looked for someone else. Looked for, we call it Messias. I don't know how to say this in English. I think it's the same. Messiah, yeah. And the Venezuelan young people looked for a Messiah, and they saw it in Chavez. Chavez at the start wasn't the same guy he was in 2005, at least. But they saw it as the Messiah, as the one who will save Venezuela for everyone. And the truth is that it wasn't that way. Actually, Chavez just turned left as never seen. Chavez went into the left wing inside Latin America, and we had Cuba, we had then Venezuela, then we had Brazil, then we had Argentina, then we have Bolivia, and we have a lot of countries inside this continent which were doing the same thing. They created the UNASUR. They just tried to demolish all the right inside Latin America. So, why are we in this point? For that generation who grew in a welfare system that doesn't work and never will work, actually, which petroleum was the base of all the Venezuelan economy, and it failed in the last 10 years of the past century, so they had to save for something else. And that is the reason why, in that moment, Venezuela, or young Venezuelans, were left-wing or were socialist. And actually, we received an education on the college of Marxism. Everything in our education are Marxism. And it is not new. It's not for Chavez. It becomes years ago, at least 30, 40 years ago. It's not new. We had a problem no one saw, and we just realized that we had the problem. It was just too very late. And since 2012, it just go down. With the death of Chavez, everything just blew, and Venezuela fell into the abyss Chavez created. So that is the problem. Now we are trying as liberty leaders to explain the new generations that this is the real way. We never saw the right in Venezuela. We never saw the liberty inside Venezuela. We just saw authoritarian regimes from left to right, and everyone thought it was the nice thing or the only thing they know. So that's the problem. It's always more big than that, but we can just try to pull it on and that.
I just want to say, to answer your question about the impact that our socialist regime has had in other countries, I think it's important to mention that Venezuelans have learned the lesson, and that we often see red flags in other countries. We advise Peru, we advise Chile, we advise Colombia, and I think Latin America is just coming closer and closer to socialism, and we all just starting to see flashback, like, okay, this happened the same way, see the red flags, see or advise, yeah. And I think it's very difficult because people sometimes just don't want to see the reality, and they just want to see that socialism is the problem. And I think Venezuelans learned the lesson, and that they know what they want for the future. They know the solution. Maybe they don't know it's called liberalism, but they have like the idea of a big individual, little state, like they have that notion now. So yeah, I just don't want to see Colombians advising Peruvians. I don't want to see Peruvians advising Bolivians. I don't want to see the history repeated all over again, all the time.
I only want to add the answer for John, because it could be really interesting for even the lecture that Ken gave us. Here in Colombia, we are measuring the potential apport, the potential process that the work labor of migrants, like these young professional, really clever people are doing to Colombia. In the next decade, it's almost 0.1% of the GDP they are adding us now. We are measuring that with the central banking, and many institutions are looking for these numbers, how that can increase the potential growth of Colombia, welcoming these intelligent, well-driven people from Venezuela. And of course, if Venezuela is open for business, we, the Colombians, are the first with the brother Venezuelans to make business in Venezuela. But for now, the migration is adding us like 0.1 for the next decade is the measurement.
Thank you, Jorge. Oof, what a day. It's been a crazy day. So, first of all, give it again to all of these amazing human beings. And this is what we're here for. This is